Hello, everybody. This is NGO Soul+Strategy. Alexander Caillet is one of the pioneers in the field of team coaching, and that's what we're going to talk about today. He accomplished this together with his partner and co-founder, Janice Caillet, and his colleagues at the team coaching company Corentus, and we'll learn in a moment more about what Corentus is. Alexander and I met during my training in team coaching offered by Corentus, since Corentus is also a professional development firm. Alexander and others at Corentus offer team coaching for nonprofits and for-profits, and he's going to tell us more about that. He himself has worked with, amongst others, Oxfam America for more than 10 years, as well as other nonprofits, and we will be talking about that. Alexander, other colleagues at Corentus, and I have been working together within the context of a big NGO client for the last 1.5 years or so. And one day, Alexander and I got talking about cultural behaviors and practices in INGOs and other nonprofits and what he has observed. And we discussed some culturally embedded behaviors. And what struck me about that was how he compared those with Corentus's private sector clients. Things got really interesting when we talked about political behavior in INGOs. So I had to invite him to the podcast. And so there we go. Welcome, Alexander. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tosca. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm looking forward to this. So listeners, a quick bio. Alexander is the CEO and co-founder of Corentus, as I said, for the last 12 years. He is also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University here in the US for 24 years in his leadership coaching certificate program. He has worked at a couple of other coaching and consulting companies as well, and his background and his training is in organizational psychology. He's a French person who has lived in the US, as well as elsewhere, for a very long time now, longer than me, but it's this mix of being a European and now living in America for a very long time already. That mix is something that he and I have in common, and which is one of the many things I enjoy about our relationship. So Alexander, let's talk first about team coaching. I have noticed since I got trained that it doesn't seem to be, at least in my experience, that well-known a form of support or service in the nonprofit and NGO and philanthropic space. Tell us a little bit, therefore, just what is team coaching? We'll go later into unpacking what it looks like step by step.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to start the conversation. So team coaching is a modality or a form of team support that lives under the umbrella of team development. And in team development, we have team building, team facilitation, we have team training, team consulting, and we have this thing called team coaching. And what team coaching does specifically is it offers to clients an opportunity to have a team development professional to accompany them real time during their real meetings and work sessions, to provide live interventions during that real work so that teams can, in the moment, through feedback and data sharing and inquiry, get a chance to really take notice of and observe themselves in action and either strengthen strengths that they're displaying or make modifications to development needs they may have. So it's really a shift from the team building games and the team facilitation where the team development professional owns the room and team training to a real live, in the moment, in situ form of support.
Interesting. And so even though I was recently trained in Corentus's approach to team coaching, you still reminded me of a couple of things that I need reminding of. And that was, for instance, that you don't just share observational data real time, as you said, in real team meetings, And you don't just give feedback, but you also simply engage in inquiry, in asking questions to help the team think harder. Is that correct?
That's correct. It lives off of the fundamental template of executive coaching and life coaching and coaching in general, and uses inquiry as a fundamental tool to engage the client system by asking questions of what they're noticing, what patterns are they observing, what is happening for them, so that they receive questions and have to answer those questions for themselves, and in essence start to explore what they're noticing either consciously or subconsciously close to the surface and work on them live as a team.
Interesting. And the other thing that struck me, again, that you emphasized that you offer observations back to the team, again, real time, in real meetings, not in offsites, not in retreats, etc. But not just on areas for development, as you said, but also on areas of strength. And so in that sense, you use both a strength-based approach and, if necessary, a deficit-based approach.
Yeah, so you and I have talked about this just recently about the strengths-based approach. And we had that nice conversation. Yeah, so I think it's important to make this distinction between strengths and strong characteristics and what's working well, and then what we would call development needs. The data we gather real time using very specific tools does focus on both. We look at where the team is performing, where it's productive, effective, efficient, where it's being cohesive, and we notice that and we capture that data. But we also notice where the team is deficient, dysfunctional, not working well together, or really lacking in certain skills, knowledge, or aptitudes. And we feed both back to the system so that they can get a more balanced perspective on their overall state of being.
Yeah, that's right. So let's take a step back. You're the co-founder of Corentus, and we will provide in the show notes a link to Corentus's website. And full disclosure, so besides being trained myself, I'm also a core practitioner. And I have to tell our listeners that I've really enjoyed the training, the quality of the training, the quality of the training methodology. And I also really enjoy the culture of Corentus. But for those who don't know Corentus, what is your mission?
Right. So we have a very clear vision, which is a world where teams can help create a sustainable and harmonious future. That is our vision. We believe that teaming and powerful teaming and effective teaming can really create the conditions to create a much more harmonious and sustainable future for organizations in the world. And we believe that's across commercial, nonprofit, and government entities.
And government entities as well. Yeah, I like that mission formulation. In terms of, since team coaching is not necessarily that well known amongst our listeners of this podcast, and without getting too much into the weeds, but still to give people a flavor of what would happen step by step, talk us through what a team coaching engagement would look like for a philanthropic organization, an NGO, or a nonprofit if they engage with Corentus. What should we imagine?
Sure. So the steps are pretty straightforward. There's a period of staging up front where we like to get immersed in the client's context. So that's research, conversations, readings, whatever we need to do to really understand the organization, its challenges. This is essential to becoming a good team coach, is to really understand the client system and to meet the client where they're at.
Yeah.
From there, then, there's typically a round of interviews with the team members. Those are one-on-one interviews using 3 of our diagnostic frameworks, what we call the team wheel, the team life cycle, and operating modes. And we use those frameworks to run a diagnostic. We interview the team members, and we gather information around a whole series of dimensions of teaming. That can be supplemented by an invitation to observe the meeting during its regular meetings, observe the team, during its regular meetings or work sessions. And we'll observe 1 or 2 of those And we'll take that data that we observe and add it into what is called a voice of the team report.
Yes.
That report is a summary of the interviews plus the observations that we've just made during those invitational team meetings. We then feed that back to the team so then it can hear its own voice through the summary.
Mm.
And then the team can, based upon that summary, decide upon the focus areas it will choose to work. So, for example, it could be that they want to focus more on the establishment of shared goals, or it could be around communication, or decision-making, or conflict management, or managing energy, or roles and responsibilities. You name it, they pick it. We help them select that. And then typically what will happen, but not always, is there's an initial meeting called a retreat or an offsite where we meet together and the team comes to that offsite or retreat with some real work products to get done. And we do a mixture of teaching some of the frameworks. We like to dig into some of the skills, the knowledge, and the abilities the team will need to build. We teach some tools, and then we observe them working real time, where we apply all of the above in real time. And we start that process. That retreat or offsite is then followed by just a series of meetings where we attend the meetings and work sessions, the weekly, the bi-weekly meetings, and we provide ongoing team coaching to that team for a period of 3 to 6 months.
And then you have some kind of a review, or not just a wrap-up, but a review about what the impact was?
Yeah, so many of our clients like to set up a baseline measure up front based upon those focus areas. And we'll do a subsequent measurement at the 3-month and the 6-month time frame to make sure that the team is making progress, so it can get the feedback that it needs to know that A, they're making progress, but also that the time and money investment they've made is worthwhile.
No, interesting. Yeah. And one thing that I wanted to lift up also in what Alexander just said is that when he talked about the initial offsite or retreat, that the team will actually bring some real work products. So you're not only doing some training around team tools, etc., but you're then asking them to apply those in real time in that retreat and work on tasks, basically, right? Because often, and I'm lifting it up because often when we think about team effectiveness, we want to go towards team dynamics, for instance, or how much cohesion or trust is in a team. But I remember you saying several times, sometimes it's better to just start working on some products and some tasks and see if we can get better at tasks. Can you elaborate a little bit on those dimensions?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point. And it's what distinguishes team coaching from the other modalities. We believe this at our very core at Corentus, that, and by the way, just as a side, Corentus is the combination of 2 words. It's 2 Latin words, cor for heart and eventus for results. And we blended those together to create Corentus because we believe that it's really 1 part heart and human factor, but 1 part productivity, performance, and results factor that creates the winning solution. So what we believe is when we come and work with teams, yeah, it's good to do training and it's good to do skills building and it's good to get some best practices and to learn some techniques. But the real work is done around real work. When a client engages in, let's say, strategic planning or an operational review or a succession planning product, maybe they're relooking and rethinking through their compensation system or their performance management system. When the team is engaged in that real work, that's when the real group dynamics emerge.
I see.
And that's when our interventions, when our jumping in and providing feedback and asking questions will have the most impact because it's live and it's there and it's irrefutable.
Yeah. So, and they're not trying to create a good impression because they're actually having to accomplish this. So they're not showing they're not necessarily at their best in front of what some people might otherwise assume is a team trainer, but they're doing real work, and you say you see the real dynamics.
That's exactly right. You see the real dynamics. You see what's working well. Maybe they're really good at setting up a meeting. Maybe they're really good at structuring a conversation, but maybe what's not working there is how they make decisions. or how they manage conflict. And all of that emerges very clearly during a real work session.
Yeah, I never know that was the Corentus is the bringing together of cœur or heart in French, and the Latin for eventus, that means results.
Yes, it means achieving or producing.
Achieving, yes, interesting. And also to lift up to our listeners again that we're talking here about team effectiveness and performance, but also team cohesion, right? We emphasize that in our work as well. And that cohesion is one of those elements that is both important for the well-being of people in the team, but also important for outputs and outcomes and for performance. Now, how did you, so do you want to say more about what you feel is distinct about the Corentus approach vis-a-vis other good team coaching methodologies and companies, if you will?
Yeah, I think I would. I think the Corentus, what's powerful about the Corentus methodology, if I may say so myself, it's the blending of the modalities, Tosca. And so we don't go in with just consulting or facilitation or training or teaching or coaching, is that we blend it together to provide a comprehensive experience for the client to meet them where they're at. I mean, for example, we could be in a work session, let's say in a meeting, and the client stumbles upon the fact that they have no real decision-making protocols, or they're not good at decision-making. Now, at that point, there's no number of questions, there's no amount of questions we can ask that's going to solve the problem. It may just be that in that moment, they need a quick teach piece on decision-making, or they need us to facilitate a decision-making session for them. We're more than willing, as we call it, to shift hats, and in that moment, shift modalities and bring a tool or a facilitation technique to the client. They can learn it there, and then we can move back into the team coaching seat and observe them using that. I think the blended approach and the ability to pivot in the moment is really what makes us different. And it makes us much more comprehensive in our ability to really provide services to client teams.
Makes sense. Yeah. Now, how did you get involved in team coaching in the first place? What was your trajectory?
My trajectory.
Yeah.
Well, are you okay for a little story here?
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Tosca. So actually, the story begins very, very early on in my life. I was born in France. I came to the US as an immigrant at the age of 4 years old. By that time, I had already moved 4 times. Then between the ages of 4 and 18, excuse me, I moved an additional 8 times for a total of 12 times in 18 years.
Yeah.
So some people called me a third culture kid, a global nomad, but the truth was that I was very much disrupted in my growing up. And the disruption led me to really be more of a solitary type of person who had difficulty belonging and being a part of systems and groups. I suffered from that immensely. I was bullied tremendously as a kid. I had a hard time making friends because we were always moving around, and I felt a great deal of sadness and dysfunction in my ability to really work with others and collaborate. So when I went to undergraduate and graduate school, and there was a lot of teaming, I found it very difficult. I found myself always wanting to be the single person, the one person, do it on my own, and I had a hard time teaming. So when I entered the professional world and I became a consultant, and I noticed that so much of the work was done in teams, and so many of our client systems were building teams, and we were client teams and consulting teams, realizing how difficult it was for me, I just became absolutely interested and fascinated by the concept and started to dedicate my time towards learning about and being trained in teamwork and training others to do it. So think of it maybe as healing myself, but it definitely has been a fascination of mine ever since I entered the work world.
I see. I had heard part of this story, but not this. That I'm so glad I asked the question. It's very very good to understand where this comes from, your interest. Now, As I mentioned in the introduction, am I right in thinking that Corentus, your client practice in the team coaching practice is about 60% is for-profit organizations? Is that right? And 40 is not-for-profit?
It's about a 60-40 split, although I would say it's more of a 50-30 split, with 20% being in the government agency space.
Of course, I should have mentioned that. Yes, so 50, 30, 20 and
50,
20.
30, 20 is just about where we're at right now.
Which I love, and I will say that kind of spontaneously. I love the fact that your practice actually covers all those three sectors.
Yeah.
Why? Is because, as you know, a lot of both the management and the leadership literature, the research, including on coaching, is very heavily private sector normed. And those, and very also, one has to say, very American normed.
Yeah.
And the fact that from the beginning, you've been able to both learn about and bring in experience from across these three sectors, I think makes the approach more valuable because it's more diverse. So I liked it. How many years have you, as Corentus, been doing this?
So our organization, in its early forms, was born in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an early form of the organization with a different name. It became formally Corentus in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
But so we're about 2010, 23, we're about 13 years into this journey.
Okay, 13 years. And the field of team coaching is about 25 years old?
The field of team coaching dates now.
Oh,
It's back 20 or so years. However, there's been a real rise in interest
yeah,
over the past 3 or 4 years. As you know, it has exploded onto the scene.
yeah,
It has become one of the top niches in the coaching space. There is a huge amount of interest in team coaching because, one, so many organizations are moving to team-based
yeah,
structures. Number two, in our virtual world, we have access to individuals all over the world, so teaming and collaboration are becoming primary, excuse me. And third, this idea of doing the work during real time saves time and creates a greater return on the investment of time and energy and money. So this idea that we could actually be learning as we work is actually a very attractive idea for many organizations who don't have the time to get into training or to do offsites or retreats ad nauseum.
right. Yes. And of course, the whole theme of the organization as a learning organization and the team as a learning unit, etc., is also very much kind of very topical at the moment, right? It's much discussed around agility and so on. Now I'd like to dive a little bit into your observations as a practitioner of the extent to which you see differences between your nonprofit and your for-profit clients, kind of when you extrapolate in terms of what you observed during team coaching. So why don't I first just give you the floor and talk about whatever dimensions come up for you, and then prompt you for a couple of dimensions that I'm simply curious about. So is there anything upfront that strikes you as not always, but frequently somewhat different when your clients are nonprofits or government bodies, maybe, for that matter?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I've worked with a number of nonprofits now, and I'll list a few just
Please.
for your listeners. Save the Children has been a client. Oxfam and Oxfam America and Oxfam International has been a client. TechnoServe, Partners in Health, the Bright Focus Foundation, the Altarum Institute, the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, MITRE Corporation, Draper Labs, AIP Publishing, and the list goes on. So it's been quite a it's quite a list, and it's been a privilege to work with these organizations over the years.
Mm.
Some of the differences that I've noticed are pretty traditional differences, and they're well known. The first one is the real move from focus on profitability to focus on impact.
Yes.
And it's a real different feeling and energy when you're in an organization of very intelligent, very dedicated and loyal, mission-based folks who are focused on impact to beneficiaries.
Mm-hmm.
Versus similarly very intelligent, very dedicated, but profit-based individuals who are focused on profitability.
Yeah, yeah.
And that leads to a different energy that I find, because the conversations around impact are different than the conversations around profitability. And they tend to me to be much more expansive. And I find them from a heart perspective, the Corentus core heart.
Yeah.
It's very fulfilling to be in organizations that focus on impact and are trying to make a big difference in the world. Not that commercial organizations aren't. That's a falsehood.
It is.
It is a falsehood. Many commercial organizations are trying to make a difference in the world just as well.
Yeah.
Nonprofits have this impact orientation, which is really meaningful. So that's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, I find that commercial organizations tend to have a type of productivity, efficiency, effectiveness, and process rigor that many of my nonprofit clients don't quite have as much.
I just want to make sure I capture that. So you said process, productivity, and
Effectiveness and efficiency.
interesting. Okay, tell us more.
It's really a sense of having processes clarified, codified, lined up, and enacted in a way that is consistent. The commercial organizations tend to place a great premium on that, whereas I find that my nonprofit clients, the process perspective is not always as crisp and as codified. Processes tend to be a bit more ambiguous. And I find a little more wiggle room in the processes in nonprofits than I do in the commercial organizations.
Yeah, that resonates with me.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's neither good nor bad, right or wrong. It's just something that I've noticed.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think there are sometimes problematic aspects to that, but the opposite, if it's overly rigid, given the constantly changing context in which nonprofits have to operate, and the fact that they don't have much leeway or leverage, let alone real influence over what happens to their context, and therefore also to them, is maybe requires that ambiguity. That can be discussed separately, I guess.
It can be. And one of my clients once told me that it's the inherent flexibility in the processes that allows them to adapt to the changing circumstances and context.
Yeah.
So they need that flexibility, whereas commercial enterprises who are pushing out a particular product over and over again, are running an assembly line, or in the business of delivering a very similar service over and over again, can rely on those processes for maximum productivity and performance.
Yeah. Now let me spontaneously play a devil's advocate. I sometimes think that actually processes are overemphasized, especially processes around consultation. Right? Consultation of stakeholders, whether inside the organization, constituents, etc., or outside the organization, are overemphasized in proportion to what are the actual, in talking about impacts, what are the actual outcomes that we are, quote unquote, producing as an NGO or nonprofit. How would you respond to that? That there is an overly process-orientedness to the culture?
Say more about, maybe pose the question in a different manner.
Different way. So you mentioned that processes in the private sector, in your observation, are more crisp, you said, right? And more codified, right?
Codified, yes.
Yeah. At the same time, I find that in my clientele that processes are often, people are very process oriented, particularly around, well, very understandably, compliance processes towards donors, because that is a very inherently an important factor, but also very focused on making sure that all the the consultation processes have been followed.
Yes.
Yes. And in the meantime, sometimes as an observer and a consultant or coach, I'm thinking, okay, but how much are we focused on this versus what are the actual outcomes that we're producing?
Got it.
What do you think?
I think you're onto something here, Tosca. The consultation reflex, which oftentimes leads to never-ending consensus-based decision-making,
Bingo.
leads to decision paralysis
Yeah.
and action paralysis.
Yes.
That
And also lowest common denominator.
And the lowest common denominator. Yeah, I would agree with you. It's not expedient.
No, and in the meantime, the external environment keeps changing, and we're kind of still talking internally. So I worry about that. But sorry, I believe I interrupted you. Were there other factors that came to your mind in terms of differences, or should I ask you about a couple of particular dimensions that I'm simply curious about?
Please do, because I have one in particular, but please ask.
Oh, well, why don't you please bring that forth first?
Well, you and I spoke about this, and this is something that really struck me, and I want to say this in the right way, but when I first started working with nonprofits, I think I had the naive assumption that I was going to be exiting for a while the world of commercial organizations, which had dysfunction and power dynamics and issues in hierarchy and issues with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I was going to be entering into an arena where all that was going to be solved.
Right.
I thought, okay, I'm going to the nonprofit sector here. It's got to all be solved. It's going to be free of hierarchical concerns. It's going to be free of dysfunction. There isn't going to be any power plays because this is the business they're in.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to see issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to my surprise, I saw just as many.
Just as many, you're saying. Yeah, I kind of wondered about that. And I want to go into that a little bit, particularly as I said in my introduction, you said one time to me, I've seen at least just as much political behavior, and we're going to unpack that now a little bit, in the nonprofits that I've worked with as in the private sector, or maybe more. In fact, I think you said that more. Now, of course, you and I are talking as practitioners. Our knowledge is bounded by the actual kind of population of clients we work with. So this is not hardcore research, right? But still, when you used that word political habits and behaviors, what are we talking about? Obviously, we're talking about political with a small p, I imagine, as in nothing to do with partisan politics. But what are you talking about when you use that word, political behaviors or habits?
Yeah, so it lives in the world of territoriality, focus on unit, and defense of that unit. And I want to give you a very clear example because I think this will be helpful. There is a phenomenon in the world of teaming that we call the reference group concept.
Okay.
And what it refers to is you may belong to two different teams. And one team may be more senior than the other. You're a member of one and a leader of the other.
Yeah.
You're a member of the senior team, and you're a member of the senior team, and you're a leader of your own team. The reference group concept points to the fact that what is your reference group? To whom do your loyalties lie?
Okay.
And the one thing that I have found in nonprofits and many of my clients is that at the most senior level, at the executive leadership team, executive management team, senior leadership team, senior management team level, whatever you want to call that team,
Yeah.
this phenomenon is very real. So what you get is you get a senior, let's call it an executive leadership team, just for the sake of using a set of words. It's comprised of members. Maybe you have a head of programs, you have a head of humanitarian, you have a head of policy and campaigns, finance, HR, operations, maybe marketing.
Right.
Okay. And those members, those individuals lead their own units. When they come to the executive leadership team, are they truly members of that team, or are they representatives of their own teams?
They bring their silos, if you will.
Of their silos, of their units, of their divisions, or of their functions, of their, what we like to call their nests.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are truly leaders of their nests first and members of the executive team second, then what I notice is that their principal activity at the executive leadership team level is to advocate for their needs, defend their rights, defend their territory, and bargain for resources.
Yeah.
Not work together collectively and not come together collectively around shared goals and a common purpose to do what is best for the enterprise.
Right, for the enterprise. And by the way, also to use some other Corentus method terminology, not really clear on or not willing to commit to, or both, a common work product that they as a senior team alone can do, and only them in an interdependent way where they can, where the organization depends on them delivering on those common work products. That awareness is not sufficiently there. I share your observation. That's really, I do. And in addition to that, and you said advocating for your own team, etc., your budget. There's also, I feel, a kind of self-serving behavior that is hidden under a veneer of the mission or the common good, that to my mind is also self-serving, or a jockeying, as you already said, an advocate, a jockeying for position, etc., around issues that are actually not about the outcomes of the organization, are not about the mission really, but are really more about defending one's either self-interest or team interest, as you said. Does this resonate with you, or is this?
I think it resonates perfectly. I think you've landed it in a really elegant manner. I think it's the jockeying.
Yeah.
And it leads to something else. What we know about high performance teams is that individuals work from a sense of mutual accountability.
Right.
Which is predicated on the establishment of a common purpose and a set of shared goals and collective work products. That mutual accountability is wonderful to see because they have each other's backs.
Yeah.
And they actually, quote, care for each other. That having each other's backs and caring for each other leads to a particular type of energy, a particular type of leaning in to support each other. And to provide each other with what the other needs in order to benefit the broader system called the organization, the enterprise, whatever you like to call it. In the absence of that mutual accountability, when we're jockeying for power, then what you get is a set of factions.
Yeah.
And you don't get the benefit it's the benefit of that collective interdependent activity, which is what teams are all about.
Well, should be about, right? But aren't always. That is our point, I think. Yeah, really interesting. I am tempted to ask you whether you have, and I wouldn't be able, by the way, to answer that question, I think myself, but why do you think this type of political behavior is more prevalent in your observation in the nonprofit sector than in the for-profit sector, which is a little counterintuitive, right?
Well, it was to me. It was to me, and it still is to this day. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't have data for it, and I don't want to speculate. I haven't done a piece of research specifically on it, although I would like to. So I actually don't know the answer to your question.
I would love to do some research with you on that. In the book that George Mitchell and Hans-Peter Schmitz and Barney Talek and I have co-authored, we talk a little bit about this disconnect between the dishonesty of the discourse, as I sometimes call that, and the disconnect or the gap between the espoused culture, the aspired culture that NGOs like to talk about, and the real in-use behaviors and habits. And I think what you and I just talked about is one of those, I think, examples that our sector would do well to be a little bit, to own up a little bit more to that. So anything else in terms of differences before we move towards the latter part of the interview? Anything in terms of distribution of authority and decision rights that strikes you as different in your nonprofit clients than in your for-profit clients, or anything in terms of team leader habits and behaviors? What do you think? Anything else that strikes you, or not really?
I think in terms of decision rights and authority, the one thing that I've noticed is that most of my nonprofit clients tend to really focus on consensus as the fundamental decision mode, and get caught up in that consensus, or unanimity, if you will, the other mode, and get caught up in it and can get paralyzed by it. The striving for inclusion can sometimes get in the way of expediency and effectiveness. I found that my commercial clients will tend to work with authority and democracy. They'll use voting and democracy techniques, or they'll just delegate authority to other individuals to go make the decision, or authority with consultation, if you will. First consult, then make the decision, which tends to be more expedient. And that's not always the case, but I find it is enough the case to say it.
Interesting. What was the one surprising thing for me in what you just said is that democracy and voting is used more in teams in the private sector, in your observation.
It is, like multi-voting, nominal group technique, Delphi techniques, or just simple majority, super simple majority voting, just to move things along. There's this sense of urgency in the for-profit companies that moves things towards expediency, and sometimes decision-making is a different types of decision-making are a consequence of that expediency. Yeah,
expediency. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, what do you find most rewarding, Alexander, about team coaching a senior team in a nonprofit or government agency or philanthropic organization? And what drives you mad, or what do you find annoying or less rewarding? I mean, these are my words, not yours. Okay, listeners, please. But I like to, to put it in a little bit provocative way on purpose.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So I think the answer to your first question is real simple. Is I love to know that we at Corentus can be a partner to an organization that is making such a difference in the world. Although we're not in the field, we're not on location, we're not there doing the work that these amazing people do, we're behind the scenes helping and supporting and contributing to the overall effectiveness and efficiency of how they do it. And that to me is just remarkable.
Yeah.
To me, it's a privilege, which is why we have a nonprofit practice, and why it's growing and it's going to continue to grow.
And you wanted to grow, right, Janice? And you want to grow that further, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And it's growing. Just this past 2 weeks, we've received 3 requests from nonprofit clients to work with us. So we are more than happy to, and it's a real joy. Annoying.
Or less rewarding, more challenging dimensions that we haven't talked about yet in these organizational animals, as I like to call them sometimes.
Organizational animals.
Yeah.
I think it's the speed of change or the pace of change. Okay. I find that change, which is structural change, systems change, process change, culture change, change in attitudes, behaviors just seems to take a lot longer in nonprofits.
Takes a lot longer.
It takes a lot longer. So and it's revisiting tools and techniques and practices over and over again. The embedding of a tool or a practice or a way of working just seems to take longer. The old habits die hard and they tend to be entrenched, and it just takes longer for us to get the traction we need. Bring in those tools and observations that make a difference, that start the change ball rolling. So I find that to be less rewarding and requires a lot more patience.
Requires more patience. Yeah.
Interesting.
And again, let's be honest. If that is your observation, then probably it means that, again, the ability of the organization to change in response to changes in the external environment overall is just less, right? Because of these behaviors. As if these are cultural artifacts, if you will, then we have to worry about that. And I think we do. It's one of the themes in my consulting and coaching practice.
Well, just to build on what you're saying, using the reference group concept, if you have a group of individuals leading the organization, each reacting to external drivers in a different manner, it's going to take a long time for that enterprise organization to change. Versus if they come together as a collective and meet those drivers head on, and make the changes required for the enterprise together in unison and in alignment. I just want to bring that concept back, because that's what I notice, is that each one is off doing their own thing, and it's inefficient and ineffective.
Yeah. So even there, what you're saying is, what I hear you say, tell me if I'm wrong, what people, that siloed behavior coming into the senior team, if you will, right? Looking out mainly for the unit's perspectives and interest, is also visible in how observations on the external environment are made and shared or brought into the senior team. Is that what I hear you say or not?
That's what you're hearing me say, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I feel like we could talk a lot more about this, but we do have to bring it to a close. So, Alexander, let me ask you, simple question. Where should people go if they want to learn more about you as a practitioner and they want to know more about Corentus?
Well, thank you for that generous offer. If folks are interested in learning about us, they can go to our website, which is Corentus, Corentus, Corentus.com. Or send us an email at engageus@Corentus.com.
Okay.
Those are the two quickest ways to get in contact with us.
Okay. And is it okay if I also put in the show notes your LinkedIn profile?
Please.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be delightful.
Now, also, just to ask you, haven't we, since I'm a core practitioner also of the broader practice, don't we have an upcoming low bono and pro bono opportunity? Maybe you want to mention that, and we can put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, that's actually really important. So the International Coaching Federation, the ICF, I've got some notes here that I'm going to be reading from, just so I'm accurate in my translation. The ICF has just created a new program called the ACTC, which is a team coaching certification program.
Okay.
And they have credited certain organizations like ours to be deliverers of team coaching training, which help people get that ACTC. So by going through the Corentus team coaching training program or another organization's team coaching program, you can achieve the ACTC accreditation. If and only if on top of the training, you do 5 team coaching assignments with 5 teams. So what we thought we would do is we want to bring together our nonprofit clients with our practitioners and provide an opportunity for those practitioners to provide to our nonprofit clients low bono and pro bono team coaching. So then you can get your 5 team coaching engagements and that'll help you then to achieve the ACTC. So if you're an organization that's interested in receiving team coaching at a pro bono or low bono rate, then please contact us, because we'd love to connect you with our practitioners and make that match.
Make that match, yes. And that's something that I wanted to make sure our listeners are aware of. So I'm glad I asked you about that. Well,
The link?
I will provide the link in the show notes. Not to worry. Well, thank you, Alexander, for all your insights. It's been a real joy, and I must tell you, I enjoy learning from you every single day. It's just been a real a very positive learning experience to learn about team coaching through Corentus, and also to be part of that broader team of core practitioners. So thank you for that experience, and thank you, listeners. If you found this podcast episode stimulating, then be sure to check out our other episodes in the podcast that focus on organizational culture, on the DNA of the sector, and the identity of nonprofits, NGOs, and philanthropies. You can find these episodes and more on my website, 5oaksconsulting.org. That is with the number 5, and also on my YouTube channel. I also wanted to mention that I have a new offer, and that is a one-off advisory call with me. So if you do not have the budget right now, for instance, for a longer-term engagement, but you would like to just talk through some of the challenges you're facing in the sector, or and in your organization, or you just talk a little bit about what's happening in the sector, then go to my website again, 5oaksconsulting.org, and you can register directly on the website for such a call. I look forward to learning with you again next time on NGO Soul and Strategy.